Join me tonight on Twitch at 10 p.m. Eastern at the conclusion of the Cowboys-49ers game, where we'll talk about everything that happened today in the divisional round of the playoffs. Link to join below. And now, on with our feature presentation. So, how about them Giants? Yeah, that was a rough one. We haven't had a divisional round game like that in a while, where it was just a total onslaught from start to finish, and where you never thought, not for one iota of a second, that the Giants had a chance to win this game. Everything about this was ugly with a capital U. And look, obviously, the Giants surpassed any and all expectations that even the most optimistic fan had for them at the start of the season. For the Giants, after everything they've been through over the past few seasons, to somehow make the playoffs with this roster and win their first playoff game since Super Bowl 46 more than a decade ago was nothing short of remarkable. And it was a heck of a season. But man, what a sour way to go out on just a total annihilation. When the Eagles are doubling your first down 26-13, when they're practically doubling your total yardage 416-227, when they're going 10 for 14 on third down, when they're turning your best player, Dexter Lawrence, into a complete non-factor, and when they're picking up 268 rushing yards on 6.1 yards per carry, you know it's just not going to be your day. Nothing about this game was competitive, nothing about this game was fun to watch unless you hate the Giants or love the Eagles. It was just a bad game. And the crazy part about this game is that you kind of had the feeling before the game even kicked off that it just wasn't going to be their day. Because the morning of the game, the hotel that the Giants were staying at had no running water thanks to a burst pipe. And what that meant is that the players were thrown off of their normal routines. No morning showers, no anything involving running water whatsoever. Football players are creatures of habit. They have very specific routines, and especially in the playoffs, anything that you do that throws them off of their routine and forces them off of their game can be a major problem. Obviously, in no way am I saying that the Giants would have beaten the Eagles if their hotel had running water. But you know when you wake up and you just know it's not going to be your day? That's what the Giants dealt with yesterday. So why do I bring all that up? Because I kid you not, this is not the first time prior to a divisional round game against an NFC East team that a team had a major problem in their hotel that threw them off their game in a big time way. Although this problem was way, and I truly mean way worse than having no running water for a morning. Try an incident in the hotel elevator that made a starting player lose his vision, completely altering the game plan. Because in the 1972 divisional round of the playoffs between Green Bay and Washington, let's just say that no one was giving the Packers much of a chance to pull off the upset and win this game. And that was truer than ever after what happened in the hotel the morning of the game. Because this is the story behind one of the craziest pregame incidents in the history of the divisional round, and in the over 100-year history of the Green Bay Packers franchise. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand how the Packers got to this point, just so that we can understand how truly slim their chances were at winning this game, even before all this went down. It's December 24th, 1972. It's Christmas Eve, and as it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas because it's the most wonderful time of the year, we have an absolutely big NFC divisional game on our hands over at RFK Stadium between Washington and Green Bay. Winner moves on to the NFC Championship, loser goes home. I don't think anyone had any expectations whatsoever, especially after Minnesota's recent dominance in the NFC Central, that the Packers would be any good in 1972. Ever since they won Super Bowl II, they had been terrible, missing the playoffs in each of the previous 4 seasons, and posting an abysmal 4-8-2 record in 1971, which was their worst record since all the way back in 1958 in the pre-Lombardi years, so long ago that the American Football League was not even created yet. However, to the shock of just about everyone, somehow, they found themselves in the divisional round of the playoffs, thanks to a 10-4 record, which topped the division over the 8-5-1 Lions, the 7-7 Vikings, and the 4-9-1 Bears. Which raises the question, how the heck did the Packers do it? Well, it wasn't with their offense, I can tell you that much. Scott Hunter was their starting quarterback, and if you want to learn more about him, You can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. He threw 6 touchdown passes and 9 interceptions all season. They finished dead last in passing touchdowns thrown and second to last in passing yards. They had no aerial game to speak of. Their passing game in 1972 was the equivalent of any Miami Dolphins losses that season, in that you couldn't find them because it was non-existent. Which means that they did it on the strength of this unit that you've been watching this whole time, their defense. Green Bay had a dominant defense in 1972 that allowed just 16.1 points per game, including 10 points or less in 5 of their 14 outings. It was a remarkably consistent unit that was the 4th best in all of football, only behind Miami, Pittsburgh, and Washington. It was a unit that allowed the fewest passing touchdowns of any team in the league, allowing just 7 all season. And it was a unit that was just as good against the run, allowing a league-best 3.4 yards per carry, and allowing just over 108 yards per game, which was the 2nd-best total in the league, only behind the Dallas Cowboys. Green Bay knew that they got to this point where they were back in the playoffs for the first time since 1967 on the strength of their defense, with defensive tackle Bob Brown saying, "We're number 1 in defense in the NFC, and defense is the name of the game." And I bring that up because this man right here, as in the man who said that quote, is Robert Brown. If there's any one player that the Packers definitely do not do this without, it's Brown. There were 2 Pro Bowlers on the Packers defense in 1972, with one of them being linebacker Fred Carr, and the other one being Bob Brown. Brown had been in the NFL since 1964, when he was drafted by the San Francisco 49ers in the 13th round of the 1964 NFL Draft, and had been playing with the Packers since 1966, being in the starting lineup for every game since the 1970 season. And in Brown's very solid NFL career lasting over a decade, this was by far the best year of his career, which is crazy, seeing as he nearly died in the offseason after being shot in the face while sitting in his car. As guard Bill Lueck said, the joke on the team was that we should hire someone to shoot him every year in the offseason. He made it to the Pro Bowl for the first and only time in his career. He recorded a safety in a game against the Houston Oilers, which was the first and only safety of his career. And he was the anchor on that aforementioned defensive line that was just about impossible to run on. Seriously, entering the playoffs, Green Bay was on a 3-game winning streak, and in those 3 games against the Lions, Vikings, and Saints, they allowed 131 total rushing yards, or 43 per game. None of that happens without Bob Brown clogging up the middle. And everyone knew that if the Packers were going to pull off this upset against a Washington team that was 11-3, was the best in the NFC by a country mile on paper, and that previously beat Green Bay earlier in the season, that they were going to need the defensive line, and in particular, Bob Brown, to make an impact. The good news for the Packers was that he definitely made an impact, alright. The bad news? It was before the game, and it was not in the way that anyone could have possibly envisioned. When the Packers players woke up in DC on the morning of the game, after they got ready, they headed to the elevators to go downstairs. It's unclear whether this was to eat breakfast, or whether this was to get on the buses and head down to the stadium for the game. There are no details about what time of the day this was, and what this series of events was. However, Bob Brown and Bill Lueck were standing next to each other, waiting for this elevator to come. Remember that this was back in the 1970s, and it was incredibly commonplace for people to smoke. If you think today is bad with smoking, roughly 1 out of every 8 people today, or 12.5%, smoke. In 1972, an almost unfathomable 43% of adults smoked. You could smoke just about anywhere. Heck, Len Dawson literally smoked a cigarette at halftime of Super Bowl I. And you could absolutely smoke in the hotels. That was fair game back in 1972. And with that, you might be able to see where this one is going. Because while Brown and Lueck were waiting for the elevator to arrive, Brown was holding a long, lighted cigar in his hand. And when Brown turned around, by complete accident, he caught Lueck in the eye with the live end of the cigar. Lueck was the team's starting right guard. It was a former first-round pick from 1968. He started all but one game for the Packers in 1972. and he had started all but one game for the Packers since 1969. And now, here he was, getting burnt in the eye by a live cigar by one of his teammates in the hotel. Obviously, this poses a major problem, because now the man could not see, and instead of going through the usual pregame routine, Green Bay was trying to figure out how to get Lueck good enough to go, considering he just got hit in his eye with a live cigar. This included using eye drops and even going as far as using an eye patch. But obviously, this was a complete disaster. The whole water fiasco with the Giants stinks, don't get me wrong, but no one got hurt from that. No players on the Giants were put on the injury report and had to play the game wearing an eye patch because they couldn't take a shower in the morning. This was Green Bay's starting right guard, just moments before the game, losing his vision thanks to the carelessness of his teammate. Now, for what it's worth, Lueck held no ill will toward Brown for this. The two men were extremely close, right up until the day that Brown tragically died in 1998 at the age of 58. As Lueck said on Brown in a 2012 interview, "Bob died way too young. I'll always remember him as a great teammate and a fun guy to be around. And the man could cook." And in every interview since 1972, Lueck never even brought up the cigar incident. This was truly just a mistake, and a big one at that, but a mistake that didn't break the strong bond that the two men had. But the point still remains. Lueck cannot see. The Packers were going into this game with a left guard who, for all intents and purposes, was now blind and visually impaired. And as you could tell from the highlights of this game, that was a pretty good omen for how this day was going to go. Sometimes, you just wake up and you know it's not going to be your day. And sometimes, you know it's not going to be your day because you get hit in the eye with the live end of a cigar. And when the final whistle sounded here, it was nothing short of Green Bay being absolutely dominated, as Washington won the game by a final score of 16-3. Everything about this game for the Packers was bad. Their offense was woefully inefficient, picking up just 10 first downs. Scott Hunter completed just 50% of his passes, took 2 sacks, threw an interception, and finished the game with a passer rating of 52.4, which was well below the league average of 66.3, and was even below his already terrible average on the season. The ground game got nothing going, as Green Bay mustered up just 78 rushing yards on 29 carries, averaging just 2.6 yards per attempt. And Green Bay's usually great run defense was inefficient today, as Larry Brown ran for over 100 yards and over 4 yards per carry. It was one of those games where Washington led it 10-3 at the half, and not for 1 second did you ever think that Scott Hunter and company had it in them to come back and eventually take it. So this might have been the worst day ever for Bill Lueck. Not only is he away from home on Christmas Eve, and not only does he now have to sport an eye patch because he got burned with the live end of a cigar, but his team just lost their playoff game, and their season was over. As Lueck summed up so eloquently, "It just wasn't my day all around. We lose the game, and I get burned in the eye." And yeah, I think that's about all that needs to be said. You lost, and you got burned in the eye. That's a pretty bad day. Even Washington couldn't help but laugh at just how absurd the situation was, with defensive end Berlin Biggs saying after the win to move on to the NFC Championship on Lueck's misfortune, "I guess it was a bad day all around." Understatement of the century right there. Look, losing in the playoffs, it's never fun. Losing your vision is never fun. Combine the two, and do it on Christmas Eve? That's just about the worst way to start off the holiday season imaginable. As an offensive lineman, the last thing you want to do is get burned by your opponent. But never in a million years do you ever expect to be burned by your own teammate. If ever there was an incident that was a bad omen for how a game was going to go, this was the one right here. Because on this day in 1972, whereas people across the country learned valuable holiday lessons, like 'tis better to give than to receive, and being around people you love is what Christmas is all about, the Packers learned a very valuable holiday lesson of their own, which was, don't stick the live end of a cigar in someone's eye. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.